The grand hall of Buckingham Palace buzzed with nervous energy as staff members hurried through their morning duties. It was a crisp autumn morning in 2022, and the newly crowned King Charles III was settling into his role as monarch. The weight of the crown felt heavier each day, not just because of its physical presence, but because of the countless decisions that came with ruling a nation. Lady Sarah Parker Bowles, Camilla's younger sister, had been waiting in the ornate drawing room for nearly an hour. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the carefully prepared proposal that could change her family's financial future forever. The Parker Bowles family had always lived comfortably, but recent investments had gone poorly, and several family members were facing serious financial difficulties. Sarah had spent weeks crafting the perfect approach. She knew that approaching the king directly was risky, but desperate times called for bold measures. Her brother, Tom Parker Bowles, the food critic, had mounting debts from a failed restaurant venture. Her daughter, Laura Lopes, was struggling to maintain her art gallery, and even her own country estate needed expensive repairs that the family simply couldn't afford. When the heavy oak doors finally opened, King Charles entered with his characteristic measured steps. His face showed the strain of recent months. The death of his beloved mother, Queen Elizabeth II, the complex transition to kingship, and the endless stream of royal duties that now consumed his days. He wore a navy suit that seemed to hang slightly loose on his frame, evidence of the weight loss that stress had brought. "Your Majesty," Sarah began, rising gracefully and offering a deep curtsy. She had practiced this moment countless times, but standing before the King of England made her rehearsed words feel inadequate. Charles gestured for her to sit, taking his place in the chair opposite her. The room felt impossibly large, with its towering ceilings and portraits of long-dead monarchs watching from gilded frames. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady tick of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. "I understand you wish to speak with me privately," Charles said, his voice carrying the formal tone he had adopted since becoming king. Gone was the warmth he had once shown to Camilla's family during their courtship years. The crown had changed him, creating a distance that even his closest relationships couldn't bridge. Sarah took a deep breath and began her carefully prepared speech. She spoke of family loyalty, of the years the Parker Bowles family had supported his relationship with Camilla when the world was against them. She reminded him of the quiet dinners they had shared, the holidays spent together, the way her family had welcomed him when he needed refuge from the pressures of royal life. "We've always been there for you, Charles," she said, her voice growing more emotional despite her efforts to remain composed. "When the press was cruel, when your marriage to Diana was falling apart, when you needed friends who would accept you and Camilla without judgment, we were that family for you." The king listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. His hands remained folded in his lap, and his eyes never wavered from Sarah's face. She could see Camilla in his features. The same determined set to the jaw, the same ability to maintain composure under pressure. "Now we need your help," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not as subjects asking their king, but as family asking family. Tom's restaurant debts are crushing him. Laura's gallery is failing. My estate needs repairs I can't afford. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for investment opportunities. Perhaps a royal warrant for Tom's food business. Maybe royal patronage for Laura's gallery." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a leather portfolio, placing it gently on the table between them. "I've prepared a proposal showing exactly how these investments would work. Everything would be handled properly, through appropriate channels. No one would ever know the royal family was involved unless you chose to make it public." Charles picked up the portfolio but didn't open it. He held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, knowing that inside were detailed financial projections, business plans, and the desperate hopes of people he had once considered family. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer now but still maintaining that royal distance. "You know I cannot make such decisions lightly. The monarchy must remain above suspicion of favoritism or financial impropriety." "But this isn't favoritism," Sarah protested, leaning forward in her chair. "This is investment in sound business opportunities. The royal family has numerous business interests. This would be no different." Charles set the portfolio aside without opening it. "Everything is different now," he said quietly. "I am no longer simply Charles who enjoyed quiet evenings with your family. I am the king, and every decision I make is scrutinized by Parliament, by the press, by the people. The slightest appearance of impropriety could damage the crown." Sarah felt her composure beginning to crack. "So, our years of loyalty mean nothing? The sacrifices my family made to support you and Camilla, do they count for nothing now that you wear a crown?" "They mean everything to me personally," Charles replied, standing and walking to the tall windows that looked out onto the palace gardens. "But personal feelings cannot guide royal decisions. I must think of the institution, of the country, of the legacy I leave for William." The grandfather clock chimed the hour, its deep tones echoing through the vast room. Sarah realized that her carefully planned meeting was slipping away from her. She had expected resistance, but she had also expected some consideration, some acknowledgement of the family bonds they had built over decades. "Have you spoken to Camilla about this?" Charles asked without turning from the window. "She doesn't know I'm here," Sarah admitted. "I thought it better to approach you directly. I didn't want to put her in an awkward position between her family and her royal duties." Charles nodded, still staring out at the gardens where he and Camilla had walked just that morning, discussing their schedule for the week. "That was wise," he said, "and it makes my answer easier to give." He turned back to face Sarah, and she saw in his expression the final decision she had been dreading. "I cannot approve royal investment in your family's business ventures. I cannot provide royal warrants or patronage based on personal relationships. To do so would compromise the integrity of the monarchy and put both your family and the crown at risk." Sarah felt tears threatening but fought them back. "So that's it? After everything, that's your answer?" "I'm afraid it must be," Charles said, returning to his chair. "The crown requires sacrifices from all of us, including the sacrifice of personal desires for the greater good." "The greater good," Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. "And what about the good of the people who stood by you when you needed them most?" Charles picked up the portfolio and handed it back to her. "I understand your disappointment, and I wish circumstances were different. If there are other ways I might help. Personal recommendations, perhaps, or introductions to appropriate business contacts." "No," Sarah said firmly, taking the portfolio with hands that no longer trembled. The shock had steadied her, given her a cold clarity. "If you cannot help your family when they need it most, then we understand exactly where we stand." She rose from her chair with dignity intact, though her heart was breaking. "I'll see myself out, Your Majesty." As she walked toward the door, Charles called after her. "Sarah, please understand." She paused with her hand on the ornate door handle. "I understand perfectly, Charles. The crown is more important than the people who helped you reach it." She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving the king alone with his decision and the weight of what it meant for his relationship with Camilla's family. The heavy door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the vast palace halls. In that moment, both Sarah and Charles knew that something fundamental had changed. The easy familiarity of their relationship was gone, replaced by the cold formality of monarchy. The king had made his choice, and the consequences would ripple through his family in ways he was only beginning to understand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elegant sitting room of Raymill House, Camilla's private residence in Wiltshire. She sat curled in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands as she processed what her sister had just told her. Sarah had driven straight from Buckingham Palace, her emotions raw and her disappointment palpable. "He didn't even open the portfolio," Sarah said again, pacing back and forth across the Persian rug. 30 years of friendship, of being there for him through everything, and he dismissed us like we were strangers asking for handouts. Camilla set down her teacup with trembling hands. She had been queen consort for only months, still learning to navigate the complex web of royal protocol and family dynamics. The revelation that her sister had approached Charles without her knowledge left her feeling caught between two impossible loyalties. "You should have told me," Camilla said quietly, her voice strained. "I could have spoken to him first, prepared the ground." Would it have made a difference? Sarah demanded, stopping her pacing to face her sister. He made it clear that personal relationships mean nothing now. The crown has changed him. Camilla, the Charles we knew, is gone. Camilla closed her eyes, remembering the man who had courted her for decades, who had waited patiently through his marriage to Diana, through years of public scandal and private heartbreak. That Charles had been warm, vulnerable, someone who valued personal loyalty above all else. But the Charles who now wore the crown was different, more distant, more concerned with duty and protocol than with the people who had supported him through his darkest times. The sound of car tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see her son Tom's battered Range Rover pulling up the drive. Behind him came another car carrying her daughter Laura. Sarah had clearly called them both, summoning the family to deal with this crisis together. Tom burst through the front door without knocking, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did the king really turn down our request without even considering it?" Laura followed more quietly, her artist's eye taking in the tension in the room immediately. She had always been the most sensitive of Camilla's children, the one who felt family discord most deeply. "Mum," she said softly, going to embrace Camilla. "I'm so sorry you're caught in the middle of this." "I'm not caught in the middle," Camilla said firmly, though her voice betrayed her inner turmoil. "I'm part of this family. And I'm also married to the king. I have to find a way to honor both those roles." Tom threw himself into a chair with characteristic drama. Honor? Where was the honor in the way he treated Aunt Sarah? Where was the honor in completely dismissing our family's needs? "Tom, please," Camilla began, but her son was too angry to listen. "Do you know what this means for me?" he continued, his voice rising. "The restaurant is finished. I'll have to declare bankruptcy. 20 years of building my reputation as a food critic, and it's all going down the drain because His Majesty can't be bothered to help the family that accepted him when no one else would." Sarah sat down heavily on the sofa, suddenly looking older than her years. "It's not just Tom," she said quietly. "Laura's gallery is hanging by a thread. My estate needs a new roof that I can't afford. We're all struggling, Camilla. And we hoped. That family meant something," Laura finished softly. "We thought that after all these years, we were more than just Camilla's relatives. We thought we were Charles's family too." Camilla felt tears building behind her eyes. These people had been her anchor through decades of public scrutiny and private pain. When the world had branded her as the other woman, as the destroyer of Diana's marriage, her family had stood by her. They had endured press intrusions, public criticism, and social ostracism because they loved her and believed in her relationship with Charles. "He is still family," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "He's just. The responsibilities of the crown are enormous. He has to think about the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" Tom laughed bitterly. "What about the smaller picture? What about the people who loved him before he had a crown to offer? What about loyalty and gratitude and basic human decency?" Camilla stood up abruptly, walking to the window where she could see the gardens she had lovingly tended for years. This house had been her refuge. The place where she could be just Camilla Parker Bowles. Not the queen consort. Not the woman who had broken up a royal marriage. Just a mother and sister and friend. "I'll talk to him," she said finally. "Tonight, when he comes here for dinner, I'll make him understand what this family means, what you've all sacrificed for us." "Will you?" Sarah asked, hope creeping back into her voice. "Will you really stand up to the King of England for us?" Camilla turned back to face her family, seeing the mixture of hope and desperation in their faces. "I've been standing up to the establishment for Charles for 30 years, she said with a strength that surprised them all. "I think I can manage to stand up to Charles for you." The evening arrived with characteristic English drizzle, the kind of persistent rain that seemed to seep into everything. Charles arrived at Raymill house looking tired and stressed, his usual enjoyment of these private evenings clearly diminished by the weight of the day's events. They sat through dinner, making polite conversation about neutral topics. The weather, upcoming engagements, mutual friends. But Camilla could feel the tension building between them like a thunderstorm approaching. Finally, over coffee in the sitting room, she decided to address the elephant in the room. "Charles," she began carefully, "I spoke with Sarah today." His face immediately shuddered, taking on that formal expression she had learned to dread. "I see," he said simply. "Do you?" she asked, setting down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Do you really see what you've done today?" Charles straightened in his chair, and she could see him shifting into his royal mode, the one where duty and protocol took precedence over everything else. "I made a difficult but necessary decision. The monarchy cannot be seen to show financial favoritism to family members." "Family members?" Camilla's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "These aren't distant relatives asking for handouts, Charles. These are the people who welcomed you into their lives when you were just a divorced prince with a broken heart and a terrible reputation." "That was different," Charles said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I was different then." "No," Camilla said firmly, standing up and beginning to pace just as her sister had done earlier. "You weren't different. You were just honest about what mattered to you. You told me countless times that their acceptance meant everything to you, that their loyalty during the dark years kept you going." Charles remained seated, watching his wife pace with an expression that mixed love and frustration. "Camilla, you have to understand the position I'm in now. Every decision is scrutinized, every favor questioned. If I help your family financially, how can I refuse similar requests from other nobles? Where does it end?" "It ends with integrity," Camilla shot back, turning to face him directly. "It ends with remembering who you are and who helped make you into the man worthy of wearing that crown." "The crown isn't about worthiness," Charles said quietly. "It's about duty and sacrifice, and putting the needs of the country above personal desires." Camilla felt something cold settle in her chest. "Personal desires? Is that what you call loyalty to the people who loved you? Is that what you call gratitude to the family that stood by us when the whole world was against us?" Charles stood up then, moving to the fireplace and staring into the flames. "You're asking me to compromise my principles as king for personal relationships. I'm asking you to remember that your principles as a man should matter too," Camilla replied, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm asking you to remember that the crown should elevate your character, not replace it." They stood in silence for several moments, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. Finally, Charles turned back to face her. "What would you have me do?" he asked. And for a moment, she heard the old Charles in his voice, the man who had once valued her opinion above all others. "I would have you find a way to help the people who helped us," she said simply. "Not because they're my family, but because it's the right thing to do. Because loyalty should be rewarded, not punished. Because the man I married would never have let good people suffer when he had the power to help them." Charles looked at her for a long moment, his face a battlefield of competing emotions. "And if helping them damages the monarchy? If it opens us to accusations of corruption or favoritism? What then?" "Then we face those accusations together," Camilla said, moving closer to him. "The way we've faced everything else together. The way my family faced the world's criticism for supporting our relationship." Charles reached out and took her hands in his, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers. "The crown changes everything, Camilla. It has to. The country must come first. Always. The country needs a king with a heart," she replied, squeezing his hands. "The country needs a king who understands loyalty and gratitude, and basic human decency. Those aren't personal desires, Charles. They're the foundation of good leadership." But even as she spoke, she could see the shutters coming down again in his eyes. The king was reasserting himself over the man, duty trumping love once more. When he spoke again, his voice had that formal tone that told her she had lost. "I cannot change my decision," he said quietly. "The precedent would be too dangerous. The risk too great. I'm sorry, but my answer must remain no." Camilla dropped his hands and stepped back, feeling something break inside her chest. "Then you've changed more than I thought possible," she said. her voice barely a whisper. The Charles I fell in love with would never have abandoned the people who loved him. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle, just as her sister had done earlier that day. "I'll be staying here tonight," she said without turning around. "I need some time to think about what this means for us, for our marriage, for everything we've built together." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Camilla could hear Charles calling her name, but she didn't turn back. For the first time in their long relationship, she wasn't sure the man she had married was the same man who now wore the crown, and she wasn't sure how they would find their way back to each other across the growing divide that seemed to separate Charles the man from Charles the king. The silence that settled over Buckingham Palace in the following days was different from the usual quiet dignity of royal life. It was a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to seep into every corner of the magnificent building. Staff members whispered in hallways, their conversations dying abruptly when senior officials appeared. The usual easy camaraderie between departments had been replaced by a tension that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. King Charles threw himself into his official duties with an intensity that worried his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton. Meeting followed meeting. State papers were reviewed with meticulous attention to detail, and every royal engagement was executed with flawless precision. But those who knew the king well could see the strain in his movements, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking, the distant expression that had replaced his usual warmth. Queen Camilla had not returned to Buckingham Palace since that night at Raymill House. She fulfilled her official engagements with professional grace, arriving precisely on time and leaving immediately afterward. The warm exchanges between the royal couple that had become a source of comfort to palace staff were conspicuously absent. When duty required them to appear together, they maintained the necessary facade, but there was no mistaking the coolness between them. Sir Clive found himself in the uncomfortable position of managing a crisis that officially didn't exist. The press had noticed the Queen Consort's frequent absences from the palace, but the official line was that she was spending time at her private residence for personal reasons. No one mentioned the growing rift between the king and his wife's family, or the way that rift was affecting the royal marriage itself. 3 weeks after Sarah Parker Bowles's devastating meeting with the king, the consequences of his decision began to manifest in ways no one had anticipated. Tom Parker Bowles announced the closure of his restaurant, citing financial difficulties and the challenging economic climate. The press, always eager for royal-adjacent stories, began digging into the Parker Bowles family's financial troubles. Laura Lopes quietly closed her art gallery, selling the building to pay off mounting debts. She retreated to the countryside, her artistic career effectively ended by financial pressures that could have been easily alleviated with royal support. The irony wasn't lost on royal watchers that the Queen Consort's daughter was struggling financially while the monarchy spent millions on renovations and ceremonial events. Sarah Parker Bowles faced the most devastating consequences of all. Unable to afford the necessary repairs to her estate, she was forced to sell the family home that had been in the Parker Bowles family for generations. The property, with its centuries of family history and memories, went to developers who planned to convert it into luxury flats. The palace staff watched these developments with growing unease. Many of them had worked for the royal family for decades and had witnessed the Parker Bowles family's unwavering support during the darkest years of Charles and Camilla's relationship. They remembered the warm family gatherings, the genuine affection between the families, and the way the Parker Bowles clan had provided Charles with a sense of normalcy and acceptance he had rarely found elsewhere. Mrs. Margaret Hartwell, the Queen Consort's longest-serving lady-in-waiting, found herself in the impossible position of serving a mistress who grew more distant and unhappy with each passing day. Camilla's natural warmth seemed to be fading, replaced by a brittle professionalism that worried everyone who knew her well. "Your Majesty seems tired," Mrs. Hartwell ventured one afternoon as she helped Camilla prepare for a charity engagement. Camilla looked at her reflection in the mirror, seeing a woman who seemed to have aged years in a matter of weeks. "I am tired, Margaret," she admitted. "More tired than I've ever been." The charity engagement that afternoon was particularly difficult. It was a foundation that supported struggling families, and as Camilla listened to stories of financial hardship and family separation, she couldn't help but think of her own family's struggles. The irony was bitter. Here she was, the Queen Consort, offering sympathy and support to strangers, while being unable to help her own sister, son, and daughter. During the car ride back to the palace, Camilla made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to her private residence as had become her habit, she asked to be taken to Buckingham Palace. It was time to face her husband and the consequences of his choice. She found Charles in his private study, surrounded by state papers and official correspondence. He looked up when she entered, and she saw hope flicker briefly in his eyes before being replaced by the careful neutrality that had characterized their recent interactions. "Camilla," he said, rising from his desk. "I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk," she said simply, taking the chair opposite his desk. "Really talk. Not just exchange pleasantries about our schedules." Charles sat back down, his hands folding automatically into the formal pose he had adopted since becoming king. "Of course. What would you like to discuss?" "I want you to look at these," Camilla said, pulling out a folder she had been carrying. "These are photos from Sarah's estate sale, the family home where you spent countless weekends, where you found peace during the worst years of your life, where you were welcomed as family rather than royalty." She spread the photographs across his desk. Images of furniture being loaded onto trucks, of rooms stripped bare of the personal touches that had made the house a home, of Sarah standing alone in the empty hall where they had once shared so many happy gatherings. Charles stared at the photos without speaking, his face revealing nothing of the emotions that had to be churning beneath the surface. "Tom's restaurant is gone," Camilla continued, her voice steady despite the pain it caused her to speak these words. 20 years of building his reputation. Destroyed. Laura's gallery is closed. She's talking about leaving England entirely, starting over somewhere else where the family name isn't associated with disappointment and failure. "Camilla, please," Charles began. But she held up a hand to stop him. "No, let me finish. You made your decision based on duty and protocol. You chose the institution over the people who supported that institution when it needed support most. I understand your reasoning, even if I disagree with it, but I need you to understand the consequences of that choice." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing Sarah signing the papers to sell her home. "This woman stood up to the press for us. She endured years of speculation and criticism because she believed in our love. She watched her family name dragged through the tabloids because she refused to distance herself from us when it would have been easier to do so." Charles reached for the photograph, studying Sarah's face in the moment of losing her family heritage. His hands trembled slightly, and Camilla saw a crack in the royal composure he had maintained for weeks. "And now," Camilla continued, "when she needed our support, when our family needed the same loyalty they had shown us, you turned them away. Not because helping them would have been wrong, but because it might have been politically inconvenient." "It wasn't about political convenience," Charles said quietly, his voice lacking its usual conviction. "It was about maintaining the integrity of the crown. The integrity of the crown is maintained by the character of the person who wears it," Camilla replied. "And the character you've shown my family is not the character of the man I married." They sat in silence for several minutes, the photographs spread between them like evidence in a trial. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What would you have me do now? The damage is done. Sarah's house is sold. Tom's business is closed. Laura's gallery is gone. Even if I changed my mind, it's too late to undo what's happened." Camilla leaned forward, her eyes meeting his across the desk. "It's never too late to do the right thing, Charles. It's never too late to remember who you are and who helped you become the man worthy of wearing that crown. And if helping them now opens us to accusations of favoritism, if it damages the monarchy's reputation, then we face those accusations honestly," Camilla said. "We explain that loyalty should be rewarded, that gratitude is not a weakness, that the crown's greatest strength comes not from its distance from the people, but from its connection to the values that make us human." Charles picked up one of the photographs, one showing Tom clearing out his restaurant, his face etched with defeat and disappointment. "He trusted me," Charles said, and for the first time in weeks, Camilla heard real emotion in his voice. "They all trusted me to remember where I came from. who had helped me along the way. And you can still honor that trust, Camilla said gently. It may be harder now, more complicated, but it's still possible. The question is whether you have the courage to be Charles the man, as well as Charles the king. Charles set down the photograph and looked directly at his wife, for the first time in their conversation. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to find a way to help my family rebuild what they've lost. Not through royal warrants or obvious favoritism, but through the kind of quiet, behind-the-scenes support that the royal family has always provided to people who have served the crown faithfully. I'm asking you to remember that the crown's power should be used to lift people up, not leave them behind. And if I can't? If the constraints of kingship make it impossible? Camilla was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words carefully. Then you'll have to decide what kind of king you want to be. One who rules through fear and distance, or one who leads through love and loyalty. Because the man I married, the man who won my heart and kept it for 30 years, was always the latter. She stood up and gathered the photographs, leaving only one on his desk. The image of Sarah, signing away her family home. I'll be at Raymill house when you've made your decision, she said. I hope the next time we speak, it will be to plan how to help the people who helped us, rather than to explain why we abandoned them when they needed us most. As she reached the door, Charles called her name. She turned back to see him holding the photograph, his mask of royal composure finally completely gone. I never wanted the crown to change me this much, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I never wanted duty to make me forget love. Then don't let it, Camilla replied simply. You're still the man who chose love over duty when you chose me. You're still the man who fought for what he believed in, regardless of what the establishment thought. That man doesn't have to disappear just because he wears a crown. As the door closed behind her, Charles was left alone with the photograph and the weight of a decision that would define not just his relationship with his wife's family, but the kind of king he would choose to be. The silence that had gripped the palace for weeks seemed to deepen around him, waiting for his answer to break it. In that silence, surrounded by the symbols of centuries of royal power and tradition, King Charles III faced the most important choice of his reign. Whether to be a king who ruled from a distance, bound by protocol and precedent, or a king who remembered that true leadership comes from understanding the human heart and honoring the bonds that make us who we are. The crown sat heavy on his head. But for the first time in weeks, he began to consider that perhaps its weight came not from the responsibility to remain distant and untouchable, but from the challenge of carrying power while remaining human. The decision he made in the coming hours would determine not just the fate of the Parker Bowles family, but the future of a monarchy that could either evolve with the times or remain trapped in the cold isolation of tradition. Outside the palace walls, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a study filled with centuries of royal history, a king was learning what it truly meant to wear a crown with honor.